today my guest is Nicole Foss of Automatic Earth. And I was just telling Nicole right before we came on the air that I had not heard of the Automatic Earth until someone sent me along an email that's saying you absolutely have to check out this MP3 about, it was from a Transition Town conference. And so I checked it out. And if you're like me, you know, you consume a lot of information, an enormous amount of material. Doing about the crisis and everything. And so when new information comes in, I kind of treat it objectively and subjectively and say, well, do I want to accept this or not accept this? And rarely does something come in anymore that's really, that changes the way I think. And that's what this Transition Town Conference with Nicole Foss was like. So to me, it was like, and then I went to the website afterwards, and it was like turning over a new stone, and underneath that stone was an entire new galaxy that I could explore. So I've been hanging out at our website. So thank you for being on Two Beers with Steve, Nicole.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to be here. And I would say we're moving into a depression. We're moving into deflation, which is the critical point. What deflation does is it drops the prices of pretty much everything. You just remove the price support from all consumer prices and asset prices. So even the price of something like oil, which in the future is destined to be very scarce and is also very important, even the price of oil will fall. The critical point to understand is that doesn't mean that oil will be cheap, because purchasing power falls faster than price. So as demand falls and therefore prices fall, affordability gets worse at the same time. That's what deflation does. However, because the price is falling, you don't get the investment. You don't have a lot of money for maintenance. You don't get the investment in discovery, exploration, drilling, all manner of things that would deliver these small fields that we are still discovering, these things that are very difficult to produce. If you don't get the investment, what happens is your demand collapse sets up a supply collapse. So you can have an enormous fall in prices in the relatively short term, followed by an absolutely staggeringly large increase in prices when you get to the point where supply is collapsing. And I can imagine us going from possibly $20 a barrel for oil to $500 a barrel for oil in 5 years. And even $20 a barrel will be expensive if people have no money. $500 a barrel would take almost all ordinary people out of the market for oil and oil products. Now, some people who come from the energy sector would say, well, the energy supply drives the financial crisis, and the financial crisis happens because of peak oil. I would say absolutely not. Ponzi dynamics are independent of energy. Because when you have an enormous credit expansion, you're not creating real wealth, you're creating virtual wealth. So it doesn't rely on having a massive energy subsidy, but because it's virtual, it can disappear very, very quickly. Now, if you had an actual currency inflation, like Weimar Germany or modern-day Zimbabwe, what that does is you have physical currency printing that takes the real wealth pie and divides it into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces so that each piece is worth less than it was before. But what we've had is not a currency inflation. We have had a credit expansion exactly the way they did in the 1920s. In the 1720s in England, in the 1630s in Holland, these things have happened from time immemorial, all the way back to antiquity. You get the rediscovery of leverage. Leverage carries you an enormous way up on the way up, but it kills you on the way down, because credit and money are treated as equivalent during the expansion phase. However, you can't keep expanding forever because these expansions are grounded in Ponzi dynamics. In other words, there's this constant dependence on the buy-in of new entrants. If you keep expanding in perpetuity, or if you can't do that, and inevitably you can't, all the excess claims to real wealth that credit represents will be extinguished. That's how bubbles implode. That's how bubbles always implode, and that is deflation by definition. What you're doing is removing the credit portion of the supply of money and credit versus available goods and services. And because credit is now at least 95% of the money supply. When you take credit out of the system, what happens is you're left with perhaps 5% of the money supply, and of that 5% that still exists, people are going to be hanging on to every bit of it that they personally have under their control with both hands, because they don't know when they're ever going to earn another penny, if their jobs are under threat. So not only do you have an enormous collapse in the money supply, but you have a collapse in the velocity of money at the same time. So money is no longer spinning around in the economy and changing hands. It's sitting at rest. It's buried in people's backyards. It's under their mattresses. They're trying to create more credit. That's really the issue. They're not printing currency. They're not creating money supply. Quantitative easing is really about trying to stuff more credit down the throat of an economy that's already choking on it. And so it isn't going to make any difference. It's just disappearing into a black hole credit destruction anyway. It's not encouraging banks to lend. It is not increasing the velocity of money. Quantitative easing is not going to put money in people's pockets. It is not going to increase spending. It's not going to get money circulating in the economy in the way that it would absolutely have to in order to have the vaguest chance of preventing deflation. I mean, you really can't print your way out of deflation. And you can't do it with quantitative easing, which isn't quite the same as printing because that's just more credit. You can't even do it if you actually do print physical currency, because if you do that, what will happen is the bond market will send your interest rates through the roof, and then it will precipitate an enormous wave of debt default, which is deflation by definition. So if you try and print your way out of it, you just get there even faster. Well, I tell people on an individual level to hold no debt, to hold cash and cash equivalents, in other words, to have liquidity, and to have some control over the essentials of their own existence. Now, if they can do all that and they still have money left over, then I would say by all means buy gold, but hardly anyone is going to get that far down the list. So for me, buying gold is very much a secondary or tertiary consideration, because I think for most people, they're going to be, if they buy it, they're going to be forced to sell it into the ultimate buyer's market when what they need is cash. So they wouldn't get the money that they need for it, and it's really not going to help them. They'll probably take a loss. But for people who can sit on it for 20 years, it will hold its value. And so if people can get that far down the list, then I say by all means do that. Gold is real money. It's held its value for thousands of years, and I fully expect it to continue to do so. But that doesn't mean that the value can't fall in the short term. So the things that have to be done to mitigate the effects of depression have to come from the bottom up, and that is where I focus my efforts. I don't spend time talking to politicians about what they could do, because I have no confidence that any of them will achieve anything. I talk to ordinary people about gaining some control of the essentials of their own existence, particularly at a community level if they possibly can, because that's the sort of thing that matters. If you have structures at that level that are small and responsive and can move quickly, and you have them, especially at least at some nascent sort of level, if those exist beforehand, those are the very structures that can mitigate the effects of a depression and provide a model even for people who didn't manage to prepare. So if people see that there are ways of doing things, because these people over here are doing it successfully, then maybe you don't have to have a collapse that goes quite so far, because maybe people can keep their heads and say, no, there are solutions, not solutions to business as usual. Nothing is going to give you business as usual the way we currently know it. But nevertheless, there are things that will make a difference in a positive direction. People really need to see what those are. So I like to get people working on collective solutions that they can implement at a local level.